10-year-old Mira Chen pressed her small face against the reinforced observation deck's transparent walls, her breath fogging the surface as she watched the alien landscape with wide-eyed wonder. The new Terra settlement had been her home for 3 years now, ever since her xenobiologist parents accepted the research assignment on this distant world, but the mysterious valley beyond their protective perimeter never ceased to captivate. Her imagination, "Mira, breakfast!" her mother, Dr. Sarah Chen, called from their habitat pod, but the girl was already mesmerized by a cluster of luminescent insects that pulsed like living stars just beyond the settlement's energy barrier. These weren't the familiar earth butterflies from her picture books. These creatures were larger, their wings shimmer with colors that had no names in human language, and they moved with an intelligence that seemed almost sentient. Without a second thought, Mira slipped away from the observation deck while her parents were distracted by their morning research briefings. The settlement's automated systems were designed to keep dangers out, not curious children in, and she easily found the maintenance gap she discovered weeks ago, a space just wide enough for a determined 10-year-old to squeeze through. Besides, alien air tasted different on her tongue. Cleaner somehow, with hints of ozone and something sweetly floral that made her head feel light and giddy. The luminescent insects seemed to sense her presence, their pulsing patterns shifting to a gentle, welcoming rhythm as she followed them deeper into the valley. Massive trees with bark that looked like polished obsidian stretched impossibly high. Above her, their branches intertwining to form a natural cathedral of living architecture. Every step took her further from safety and deeper into a world that humanity barely understood. The insects led her past streams of water so pure it looked like liquid crystal, through meadows of grass that chimed softly when the wind touched it, and around boulder formations that seemed to hum with some internal energy. Mira's heart raced, with excitement rather than fear. This was the adventure she dreamed of since arriving on this world. As she chased the mesmerizing creatures through a particularly dense grove of twisted, silver-barked trees, their pulsing grew more urgent, more purposeful. They were leading her somewhere specific, she realized, and her childish curiosity overcame any instinct for caution. The insects suddenly dispersed in all directions, leaving Mira alone in a circular clearing surrounded by towering flora that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The silence was profound, broken only by the gentle whisper of an alien breeze through leaves that sounded like wind chimes. Mira stood in the center of the clearing, slowly turning in a circle as she tried to absorb the otherworldly beauty surrounding her. She had no idea that hidden in the shadows at the clearing's edge, 3 pairs of large, intelligent eyes were watching her every movement, with a mixture of curiosity and wariness that would soon transform into something far more profound. The first cub emerged from the undergrowth like a shadow-gaining substance, its sleek form moving with liquid grace, despite its obvious youth. Standing roughly the same height as Mira, the creature was unlike anything in human xenobiology textbooks. Its body was elongated and elegant, covered in what appeared to be fur that shifted colors with its movements, currently displaying muted grays and blues that helped it blend with the dappled shadows. Its head was distinctly feline in structure, but larger, more intelligent, with enormous eyes that reflected the ambient light like polished amber. Mira's breath caught in her throat, but surprisingly, fear didn't flood her system. Instead, she felt a deep, inexplicable sense of recognition, as if she were looking at a kindred spirit, despite the vast biological differences between them. The cub tilted its head, studying her with the same intense curiosity she felt, and she noticed the way its ears, mobile and expressive, swiveled forward in what seemed like a gesture of interest rather than aggression. "Hello," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the clearing's hushed atmosphere. The cub's eyes widened at the sound, and it took a tentative step closer. Its movement triggered the appearance of two more cubs, emerging from different points around the clearing with the same fluid grace. These appeared to be siblings, similar in size and coloring, though each had unique markings that glowed faintly along their limbs and face. The second cub, slightly smaller with more pronounced golden markings, made a sound that was part purr, part melodic trill. It was clearly attempting communication, and Mira found herself responding instinctively by humming a simple tune her grandmother used to sing to her. The effect was immediate and magical. All three cubs perked up, their bioluminescent markings brightening with what could only be described as delight. Taking her cue from their obvious intelligence, Mira slowly lowered herself to a sitting position, making herself less imposing. The cubs exchanged what appeared to be meaningful glances before the first one, the apparent leader, approached with careful, deliberate steps. When it was close enough to touch, it performed an unexpected action. It bowed its head low, almost to the ground, in what unmistakably resembled a playbow. Mishra's face split into a wide grin of understanding. This was the universal language of young creatures everywhere, the invitation to play. Without hesitation, she mimicked the gesture, lowering her upper body toward the ground while keeping her eyes on the cubs. The response was immediate and joyous. All three cubs began making excited, chittering sounds, their markings pulsing in synchronized patterns of bright blues and golds. The smallest cub, emboldened by this exchange, bounded forward and gently touched Mira's outstretched hand with its nose. The contact sent a small shock of recognition through her. The nose was warm and slightly damp, remarkably similar to a terrestrial cat or dog. Yet the texture of its fur was unlike anything she'd ever felt, softer than silk and somehow responsive. To touch, seeming to glow more brightly where her fingers made contact, what followed was pure magic. The cubs began demonstrating their play behaviors, pouncing on imaginary prey, chasing their own tails, which Mira noticed with delight, had small glowing orbs at the tips, and engaging in gentle wrestling matches. Their movements were incredibly graceful, almost dance-like, and Mira found herself naturally falling into their rhythm. Within minutes, the clearing had transformed into an arena of pure joy. Mira discovered that the cubs were not just playful, but remarkably intelligent, quickly adapting to her human movements and even inventing new games that accommodated her different physiology. When she demonstrated a simple cartwheel, they responded by executing elegant aerial rolls that made her gasp in admiration. When she showed them how to skip stones across a small pool at the clearing's edge, they quickly mastered the technique. With their more dexterous paws, the largest cub, whom Mira had begun thinking of as Starlight, due to the constellation-like pattern of spots across its forehead, seemed particularly fascinated by her laughter. Every time she giggled or burst into delighted peals of laughter, its markings would pulse in response, creating a feedback loop of joy that seemed to energize all of them. The middle cub, Shimmer, discovered that it could make Mira laugh by mimicking her expressions, contorting its remarkably flexible features into approximations of human facial expressions that were both accurate and hilariously endearing. The smallest cub, Glow, turned out to be the most tactile of the three, constantly seeking gentle contact, nuzzling against Mira's arms, allowing her to pet its incredibly soft fur, and even attempting to groom her hair with long, careful strokes of its tongue that felt like warm velvet. The trust these young creatures showed her was both humbling and intoxicating. As their play became more elaborate, Mira began to notice the sophisticated ways the cubs communicated with each other. Their bioluminescent markings weren't just responsive to emotion, they were a complex visual language. Rapid pulses seemed to indicate excitement or agreement, while slower wave-like patterns appeared to convey more complex concepts. When Starlight wanted the others to follow in a particular game, specific sequences of light would ripple along its limbs, and the others would respond immediately. The games themselves became increasingly creative. The cubs taught Mira a version of tag that involved leaping between the large, flat stones scattered around the clearing, a game that pushed her agility to its limits while seemingly being effortless for her new friends. In return, she showed them how to make flower chains from the abundant jewel-toned blooms that carpeted parts of the clearing, though their attempts were hilariously clumsy given their lack of opposable thumbs. But it was during a game of hide-and-seek that something truly remarkable happened. When it was Mira's turn to hide, she squeezed behind a large boulder and tried to make herself as small as possible. The cubs' searching behavior revealed just how sophisticated their senses were. They moved through the clearing with systematic precision, their large ears swiveling to catch the slightest sound, their nostrils flaring as they tested the air currents. When Glow finally found her, the little creature's excitement was so intense that its entire body erupted in cascading waves of golden light. The display was so beautiful that Mira emerged from hiding with tears of wonder in her eyes, and when she impulsively hugged the small being, it nestled against her with complete trust, purring with a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through her chest. What none of them realized was that they were being watched. Hidden in the dense foliage at the clearing's edge, two adult forms observed the unprecedented scene with growing amazement. The cubs' parents had followed their offspring's trail, initially fearing for their safety when they caught the unfamiliar scent of the human child. They had arrived prepared to defend their young from what their instincts told them was a potential threat. Instead, they witnessed something that challenged every assumption their species held about humans. Kethara and Velthorn crouched motionless, in the shadow of an ancient grove, their powerful bodies coiled with the tension of predators ready to strike. As the apex species of Kepler Prime, the Vorthak had evolved as perfect hunters. Their muscular frames could launch them through the canopy in pursuit of prey, their retractable claws could shred through the planet's toughest materials, and their heightened senses could detect the slightest movement from vast distances. They were built for violence, shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure into living weapons. Yet as they watched their three cubs, Kethara's spotted coat trembling with barely contained emotion, neither parent could reconcile what they were seeing with everything they believed about the pale-skinned invaders who had arrived on their world. Velthorn's deep chest rumbled with a sub-audible growl as he observed the small human touching his youngest cub. Every instinct screamed at him to charge into the clearing, to eliminate the threat before it could harm his offspring. Humans were destroyers. This was established fact. They had stripped their own world of resources, driven countless species to extinction, and now they sought to colonize and exploit Kepler Prime. The settlement's very existence was an affront to the natural order, but Kethara's keen maternal instincts read something else entirely in the scene before them. Her cubs weren't exhibiting any signs of distress or fear. In fact, their bioluminescent displays were more vibrant and joyful than she had seen in seasons. Little Sinara, whom the human had somehow named Glow, was purring with such contentment that the sound carried clearly across the clearing. This was not the behavior of young ones in danger. The small human shows no aggression. Kethara sub-vocalized to her mate, her communication a barely perceptible vibration that only another Vorthak could detect. See how it moves, careful not to startle them, gentle in its touches. Velthorn's response was a skeptical rumble. Humans are cunning predators. Perhaps this is how they hunt, with deception and false gentleness. But even as he spoke, his observed behavior contradicted his words. The human child's laughter was pure and unguarded, its movements clumsy compared to the grace of their cubs, and most telling of all, it had shed tears of joy when Sinara had displayed for it. As the play continued, both parents found themselves drawn deeper into fascination, despite their reservations. When their eldest, Zephron, demonstrated the traditional hunting pounce sequence, the human child attempted to mimic the movement with such earnest concentration that Cathara felt her throat vibrate with suppressed amusement. The child's version was hopelessly awkward, but Zephron responded with encouraging chirps and patient repetition, as if teaching a slow-learning sibling. "It treats them as equals," Cathara observed, her mental voice tinged with wonder. "Not as exotic creatures to be studied or dominated, but as friends." The revelation struck both parents with profound impact. In their species' limited contact with adult humans, every interaction had been marked by fear, aggression, or clinical detachment. The humans who ventured near Vorthak territory came armed with weapons and scanning devices, treating the native species as subjects to be categorized and controlled. But this small human approached their cubs with nothing but open curiosity and genuine affection. Velthorn watched as the human child carefully braided some of the clearing's luminescent flowers. Into Sinara's fur, the little cub sitting perfectly still and purring with obvious pleasure. The gesture was so tender, so inherently nurturing, that something deep in his predator's heart began to shift. When the child stepped back to admire its handiwork and clapped with delight, Sinara performed a spinning dance that sent sparkles of light cascading through the air, and both species dissolved into laughter, one high and musical, the others a melodic trilling. It was in that moment that Velthorn felt his bioluminescent markings begin to respond. The change started slowly, a warm golden glow emanating from the complex patterns along his shoulders and neck. Among the Vorthak, such displays were deeply significant. They indicated profound emotional states that couldn't be hidden or suppressed. The golden light meant contentment, joy, and most importantly, the complete absence of threat perception. Cathara turned to look at her mate in amazement. His massive frame was beginning to pulse with waves of warm, golden light, a display she hadn't seen since the birth of their cubs. Her own markings responded in sympathy, and she felt a deep, rumbling purr building in her chest as she watched the unprecedented scene of interspecies harmony unfolding before them. The sound that emerged from Cathara's throat was unlike anything the clearing had ever heard, a deep, resonant purr that seemed to vibrate through the very ground itself. It was a sound of profound contentment, of a parent watching their offspring experience pure joy, and it carried across the clearing like a gentle earthquake of happiness. The cubs' heads snapped up immediately, their large eyes scanning the tree line for the source of their mother's call. Mira, startled by the sudden change in her playmate's demeanor, followed their gaze and felt her heart skip a beat as two enormous forms began to emerge from the shadows. The adult Vorthak were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Standing, nearly 3 meters tall, their muscular frames rippled with power beneath coats that seemed to contain entire galaxies of shifting light. But what struck Mira most was not their obvious strength. It was the way they moved toward the clearing with slow, deliberate steps that spoke of careful intent rather than predatory stalking. Velthorn's golden luminescence had spread across his entire body, creating patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm with his mate's purring. The display was breathtakingly beautiful, like watching the aurora borealis made manifest in living form. Cathara's markings had taken on a softer, more intricate pattern, waves of blue and gold that seemed to flow like liquid light beneath. Her fur. The cubs rushed to their parents with excited chittering, their own smaller lights flickering rapidly as they appeared to communicate the events of their play session. Mira stood frozen in the center of the clearing, not from fear, but from pure awe. She was witnessing something no human had ever seen, Vorthak family communication in its most intimate form. When the adult pair turned their attention to her, Mira felt the weight of their intelligence like a physical force. These were not mere animals, she realized with crystal clarity. They were people, alien in form, but unmistakably sentient, emotional and complex beings. The male approached first, his movements slow and non-threatening, until he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his massive form. To her amazement, Velthorn lowered his great head in the same playbow his cubs had shown her. The gesture from such a powerful being was humbling and profound, and Mira responded instinctively by placing her small hand on his forehead. The contact sent a shock of connection through both beings. She felt his curiosity, his protective love for his family, and most surprisingly, his growing affection for her. Cathara approached from the other side, her feminine grace evident even in her alien form. When she gently nuzzled Mira's other hand, the girl felt tears streaming down her face. These magnificent beings weren't just tolerating her presence. They were welcoming her into their family circle. The sound of human voices calling her name shattered the magical moment. Through the trees, Mira could see the lights of search drones and hear her parents' worried calls. The adult Vorthak immediately tensed, their luminescence shifting to more muted patterns, but they didn't retreat or threaten. Instead, they positioned themselves protectively around both Mira and their cubs, as if claiming her as one of their own. When Dr. Chen and the search team burst into the clearing, weapons drawn and scanner arrays active, they stopped in shock at the scene before them. Mira sat peacefully surrounded by a Vorthak family, the cubs nuzzling against her while their parents stood guard like benevolent sentinels. The golden light emanating from the adult pair was so brilliant it seemed to turn the entire clearing into a cathedral of living luminescence. "They're not dangerous," Mira called out, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "They're beautiful. They're my friends."